Hi everyone, Julie Stern, and this video is for our book club for chapters 5 and 6. So we had such a great time at our book club because it was the first time actually that Trevor, Kayla, and I were all together for various reasons of our 3 weeks together. So we just had a blast. Our question for this week was, how can curriculum tell a compelling story that treats learning like an iterative process? And right out of the gate, someone said, what is iterative in the chat? So iterative is basically not linear. It's not a straight line. It's how do we teach in a way that has students return to their thinking, revise their understanding, deepen, amplify their learning with each new pass. So that's really kind of the way in which we think about curriculum design. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Chapter 5, we start all of our chapters with a really inspiring quote that kind of motivated us when we wrote the chapter. So in this case, we cited Paulo Freire, who said this: "The teacher is, of course, an artist, but being an artist does not mean that he or she can make the profile, can shape the students. What the educator does in teaching is to make it possible for the students to become themselves." And we think that's just such a beautiful quote for us as teachers, is not simply to transmit our knowledge to young people, but to really partner with our students to help them to become the people that we know they can become and that they want to become. So just loved that quote, and we included it here. So chapter 5 is about telling a story of our course. And that's really something new that I think we're bringing to the fields. And we started with this. Okay, how do you take all your standards of learning? This is probably one of the top questions that we get asked is, okay, this is really beautiful. I want to teach learning that transfers, but I have so many content standards, or I have a pacing guide. I have a scope and sequence. I have a textbook that my school or my district or whatever tells me I have to follow. So how do you take whoever tells you this is what you have to teach, and what do you do with that? So we've come up with what we call these critical steps for designing a transfer focused course. So prioritize thoughtfully, look at all of your standards or your learning outcomes and figure out what's most important. Arrange effectively. We don't necessarily have to go in order from the first standards in the document to the last standards in the document. We don't necessarily have to do that. So we often encourage schools to think creatively about the order in which you put things. Supplement strategically, like we talked about modern literacies in the last session. So what modern literacies do our students need to navigate a complex world? And then flow cohesively. That's that piece about telling a story. It's not just, learning in these segmented chunks, but what's the story of your course? So those are our critical steps. And we use in the chapter this sort of analogy of conceptual fence posts. So here's the conceptual fence post for social studies based on these content standards. So this is just a quick way to say, okay, you've got these standards, you read them, and then you say, okay, what's at the heart of this that are going to be the conceptual fence posts of this unit that are going to stand the test of time. So in this example, it's U.S. history. It's talking about defending democracy. This is basically sort of rise of fascism into World War II and whether or not the United States should get involved. So that's kind of the piece of history that these standards are about. And so our co-author, Krista Ferraro, actually teaches this, and she teaches in Massachusetts. So that's why there are these standards. But she selected isolationism, involvement, and defending democracy as the pillars, the conceptual fence posts. Germany, Italy, all of those things are sort of the wires in her fence. So going back to this visual, isolation, whether or not we're going to get involved, defending democracy, and involvement are the conceptual fence posts that will stand the test of time. So kids may forget the details of the lead up to World War II, but they're not going to forget, and they can apply today to things that are happening around conflict, global conflict, and whether or not the United States is going to defend democracy, be isolationist, or get involved. Those are kind of the conceptual fence posts there. So we use that example to sort of illustrate how all the work we've done previously of articulating our disciplinary vision, of choosing our disciplinary lenses, all of that is the first criteria for prioritizing our standards. So it's sort of a lead up of chapters, 3 and 4 coming to chapter 5 to say, okay, which concepts and skills are the most powerful for my students for conveying that disciplinary vision? And then cohesive transfer, which concepts and skills reveal the underlying structure of the discipline that will help my students to transfer their learning between grade levels. Real world application, which of the content standards allow for my students to see the relevance of what they're learning in their world? Interdisciplinary, are there some content standards that really help us to make connections between and across different domains? And then finally, of course, let's be very realistic and say high stakes. Are there some content standards that, because of some high stakes testing or some other factor out there, is really important for our young people? So we sort of put that as the fifth criteria. After we've gone through everything else, we do want to ask ourselves that question when we're prioritizing our standards or our learning outcomes. And so once we've done that, we've sort of gone through this prioritization, we can take those priority standards and tell a story. And so we cited Daniel Willingham, who's a cognitive scientist out of the University of Virginia, who says, why stories? It's not just, fluff and motivating based on sort of humanity's kumbaya feeling. There's actually a lot of scientific evidence behind the power of stories. And, he says, these are the 4 reasons. Stories are easy to comprehend. People are familiar with the structure of a story. They're engaging. They're easy to remember. And they have emotional resonance. They humanize abstract ideas. So we picked actually a couple of mathematics examples to share, simply just to show how powerful stories can be. Before the mathematics example, I want to share this one that I wrote for Texas history. So this is, imagine you're a 7th grade teacher of Texas history, and you've got first there were American Indians, then there was European colonization, then there was Mexican independence, and then there was the Texas Revolution. Okay, that's like the content of 7th grade Texas history. So instead of saying, hey kids, this is what we're going to do in that order or whatever, we could ask, what does it mean to be Texan? And how has this changed over time? How do nature and culture impact who you are and how you see the world? So nature and culture being those, conceptual fence posts. The story of Texas shows how where we live impacts how we live, and that new groups bring about new ideas that often lead to conflict as well as integration and changes to worldview. We'll explore these ideas with American Indian groups, European colonization, Mexican independence, and finally the Texas Revolution, with each new context further developing our understanding of human-environment interaction, as well as culture, change, and identity. So you can see here as a quick example, you can pause it if you want to read the next one. All of these are options. So the book and our companion website give tons of options for ways you can think about telling a story of your course. So here's a call to adventure using the hero's journey for 7th grade mathematics. So Kayla is our mathematics specialist. She taught 7th grade math, and she just said, imagine if you said to students, are you ready to solve the world's problems? Can we use mathematics to simplify complexity and find amicable solutions? Reasoning through complexity is no easy task. Can we use our number sense and critical thinking to creatively communicate our ideas? Here's the abyss we will face: known and unknown variables and quantities, changing at different rates. We might have to adjust our perspective to find the best angle or approach to have the best chance of convincing people we can help the world. The return. How have you made the complex seem simple? Are you able to maximize space, establish the best investment, or tell someone their chances of winning the lottery? How will your new reasoning and wisdom help you solve the world's problems? Just gorgeous. Imagine if that is how we framed 7th grade mathematics. Many people in chat were saying, oh, Kayla, we want to be in your 7th grade mathematics course. So here's some more examples from page 143. You can go visual with the story, or you can articulate the moral of the story. all of these are simply examples of ways you could think about it. So these gears, we love to talk about sort of a system and how the system of our course all works together. So often elementary teachers will have like math as one of the gears, science as one of the gears, English language arts as another one of the gears, things like that. And our companion website has all of these as templates that you can use. You can edit, you can add more gears, you can do whatever you want with them. But the idea is to simply present something to students that sort of shows a holistic picture of the entire course. So 7th grade mathematics, again, you can pause the video if you want to check this out. But Kayla put those gears sort of along 7th grade mathematics just simply as another example, another way to articulate the story of the course. And last one that I'll share, but our website has even more, is a story arc. So how can we sort of tell a beginning, middle, and end of our course to our students? And we also encourage, and lots of people were saying in chat that it would be really fun to involve students in telling the story of the course. So that's the little bit that we offer about thinking about our whole course and having a compelling story. So we went into breakout groups according to discipline, and people talked about how articulating a story of our course could impact student learning. So that's something that we did in breakout groups. Super interesting conversations. And then we moved to chapter 6, unit planning. So this visual you can see here is, kind of iterative learning. What is iterative learning? It's recursive. It requires us to constantly make new connections to grow schema or patterns of thought in the brain. And we can design iterative curriculum by constantly encouraging students to apply what they've learned to new context. So that's where we brought back up from page 40, all the way back, I think in chapter 1 or 2, our conceptual inquiry cycle. This comes from my first 2 books. It's also in our On Your Feet guide to learning learning transfer. It's also in Visible Learning for Social Studies. Basically, all of my publications have this learning transfer cycle of asking students a conceptual question and then giving them a specific context to answer that question. And then coming back to that question, sort of refining our thinking with each new context or situation or math problem or text they read or scientific experiment, scientific situation, case study in social studies, and sort of refining their thinking with each new pass, each new specific context that they explore. So we brought back up our learning transfer spectrum of how we can move students from similar transfer in an academic context towards dissimilar real world transfer. And we put this back up simply to say that, we don't have to only live in the real world dissimilar transfer, that there's some value in students learning in an academic setting, in things that solely have an academic audience. And so it's just sort of showing that spectrum and then overlaying those cycles here. So it's kind of how we think about curriculum design. What's the abstract conceptual question? What's the more academic similar transfer situation? What's the more slightly moving towards more dissimilar transfer, slightly moving towards more real world dissimilar transfer? So we just put this visual back up as a way to explain recursive thinking and how that plays out in our unit planner. So here's a quick example of our unit planner. We encourage people to delete the boxes, change the boxes, move the boxes, whatever. This is just sort of how we think about it. But there's not one right way to think about curriculum design. So these are all the pieces that we talked about in chapter 6. And then the second piece of this, so this is sort of the main part, or stage 1 of the unit planner, stage 1 and 2, if you're familiar with those words from Understanding by Design. And then this is what we call more sort of the high level overview of stage 3, which is the instructional plan. How are students going to acquire understanding of individual concepts, connect them in relationship, do a similar transfer, and then increase the complexity of the transfer, eventually leading to student action in the world. So this is our what we call our storyboard, or the storyboard section of our unit planner. It could look like this. You could only plan on this. We have a lot of schools who only plan on this and sort of skip that other part. Just some different options to share with you to think about planning. And really, we share this visual to say that we want to make sure we're thinking about student voice, student ownership, self-directed learning, students really taking ownership of their learning. And so we like to use this example of what we call freedom within structure. So if there were absolutely no rules and kids could do whatever they wanted, that would feel more like anarchy. If we told kids, everybody open up to page 92 and answer the questions, that feels more like tyranny. So when we focus on conceptual understanding, when we say, look, we're going to build your conceptual understanding, and then you can explore whatever topic you want to explore that has those concepts present to refine your thinking about those concepts. That's a transfer task that can be completely open, complete freedom for our young people. So we say that kind of lives in this ordered liberty, freedom within structure. So the structure being the conceptual understanding and the way in which we transfer. And so we have some key points about student voice and student choice in the curriculum, how we can then ensure that students are actively making decisions and are serving as co-creators in the learning process. So we have a bunch of different ideas and tools and commentary on that in chapter 6. We actually ran out of time, so we didn't even do this. Have teachers brainstorm their favorite unit and how they might enhance it in these ways that we're thinking about transfer. And we just shared our key points. So key points for chapter 5 are we can, use these careful steps to design a transfer focused course. And we can, if we have pacing guides, if we have a scope and sequence that we have to follow, we can turn them into cohesive narratives that articulate the year-long journey that students will engage in. And really engage the intellect of our students. For chapter 6, all about unit planning, we're trying to plan backwards from what? From students' ability to transfer their learning to situations we've never taught them. And instructional design can take an iterative rather than a linear approach. And then finally, we can prioritize standards or outcomes, learning outcomes, based on if they communicate our disciplinary vision, are cohesive vertically, connect to the real world, promote interdisciplinary connections, and have greater weight on exams. So those are kind of our key points from chapters 5 and 6. So hope you guys enjoyed this. We're going to answer the questions, and I'll put a link to the questions in the email that I send out to everybody.